Officer at the Makati Business Club. Just a few reminders before we begin. We request all attendees to write their full name and organization in their display name. We also encourage everyone to keep their cameras on and their mics muted for the duration of the event. Today's session will be recorded. We may also use all or part of it in our platforms and publications. We encourage you to get your questions in early, even while the presentation is ongoing. You may send in your questions by typing them in the chat box. When we call on you for your question, we will turn your mic on. Please state your name and organization before asking your question. We'd also like to recognize our viewers and guests who are joining us on our Facebook live stream. We encourage you to type in your questions in the comments section. To formally kick off the session, I'd like to call on Eileen Hiao, President and Country General Manager of IBM Philippines. She is also the Chairwoman of the MBC Women in C-Suite Committee. Eileen, I turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. To our esteemed speakers and all of our guests, a warm welcome to all of you. It is my privilege on behalf of the Makati Business Club's Women in the C-Suite Committee to welcome you here today. We are truly delighted to have you with us at this event to celebrate Women's Month and our recent partnership with Investing in Women. It's an initiative of the Australian government, Philippine Business Coalition for Women and Empowerment, and Champions of Change Coalition Philippines. Investing in Women is represented today by Kim Patria, Deputy Director for Influencing Gender Norms. The PBCW Executive Director is also here today, Julia Abad. And also, finally, we have Ruben Barreta, the Executive Director of CCC. MBC made gender diversity and inclusivity in the workplace a priority area in 2018, after seeing how diversity makes business more innovative. Not only does the commitment to D&I produce more growth and jobs, it also strengthens women's rights to work and to stay at work. The support allows them to reach their full potential in the workplace. We have partnered with organizations like Investing in Women to produce reports that would actually substantiate these claims. Recently, we ran a study on the role of gender norms in the career progression of women in Philippine organizations. I am looking forward to our research team's presentation on the outcome of the surveys and the focus group discussions we run on this topic. Today, we are fortunate to hear from speakers who will be sharing their organization's best practices in operationalizing gender diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Expect to learn more about how a multinational company like Microsoft is able to land its diversity, inclusion, and allyship commitments locally in the Philippines. We'll also be learning from a trailblazer in the multimedia industry, MullenLowe TREYNA, on how their recent recognitions exhibit their company's core values. Now more than ever, the sharing of knowledge and best practices is one of the many ways we can actively promote a more diverse and inclusive society. Despite the progress we've made in terms of creating a diverse, equal, and inclusive society, much work remains in order to understand how we can create a work environment that supports both men and women. I hope this event provides a platform for the exchange of good practices, practical solutions, and ideas to address that comes with running D&I initiatives. I hope that it will spark collaboration as well among our participants, both those joining us here in Zoom and of course through Facebook live stream, to continue championing diversity in the workplace. Thank you again to everyone for being here today, and we hope you enjoy the event. Happy Women's Month to all. Now, up next, we have Dr. Angie Zafra. She's our lead consultant for the MBC IW study on gender norms in Philippine corporations. Angie is the co-founder and executive director of Strategia Development Research Institute Incorporated, or SDRI. It's a nonprofit research organization based in the Philippines, focused on providing policy research, capacity building, and technical assistance in various social and economic development areas. Dr. Zafra's area of work focuses on the nexus of sustainability and the different sectors of societal development. She is SDRI's lead technical expert and project manager for practice areas related to organizational development, inclusive business models, climate change, sustainable tourism, gender inclusivity, and women's economic empowerment and sustainable development. Without further ado, I would pass it on to Angie to run us through the research findings. Good afternoon and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Good afternoon, Eileen, and thank you so much for that introduction. And good afternoon, everybody who's watching us this afternoon. My name is Angie Zafra, the lead of the research side of the RAIN project. This afternoon, I will be presenting the work our team at Makati Business Club has completed over the last several months, together with Investing in Women, an initiative of the Australian government, MBC Women, and Champions of Change Coalition Philippines. Next slide, please. Gender norms are social norms defining acceptable and appropriate actions for women and men in a given group or society. They are embedded in formal and informal institutions, nested in the mind, and produced and reproduced through social interaction. They play a role in shaping women and men's often unequal access to resources and freedoms, thus affecting their voice, power, and sense of self. And why are we investigating gender norms in the workplace? This is actually the third in a series of reports MBC has produced on gender equality and empowerment in the workplace. The persistence of gender stereotypes in the workplace has been one of the key findings of the 2021 MBC National Study of Women in the Philippine C-suite. While traditional expectations on the role of men and women have evolved over time, women continue to battle stereotyping as they climb the corporate ladder. Gender norms underpin family relations, educational and work choices, and affected the culture and relationships in the workplace. So in this third report, we decided to dig a little deeper. Next slide, please. This new report highlights the role gender norms play in the career progression of women in the Philippine organizations. Specifically, we aim to understand existing gender norms and stereotypes in workplaces and their impact, as well as to discover what organizations could do to minimize the negative impact of gender norms and stereotypes. 2 online surveys were released, one for C-level executives and one for middle managers, to assess the perceptions on gender norms in the workplace. The team also conducted parallel interviews and focus group discussions with C-level executives, human resources managers, and middle managers to extract narratives of lived experiences and diversity and inclusion practices. We also included one run of the safe spaces, brown bag sessions, as part of the data collection. It should be noted that companies represented in the C-level survey may or may not be represented in the mid-manager survey. Therefore, workplace-specific responses are not comparable. Respondents are also predominantly female, so the generalizability of insights from male respondents are limited. Lastly, the smaller sample size is another caveat to the generalizability of results. Next slide, please. We have 5 key findings that we would like to share with you this afternoon. Next slide. The 2022 MBC surveys of women in workplaces indicate that gender bias is mostly not felt nor experienced by mid-managers. But when they do feel it, it would be most likely be in terms of work roles. This study actually validates those initial findings. When asked broadly in work roles, most C-level executives and mid-managers surveyed said that both genders are equally fit for all types of jobs. However, when asked about specific roles, responses surfaced perceptions that lean towards gender-based segregation. Work that involved care work, health, or social or customer relations are considered a better fit for women. On the flip side, careers that require physical work or technical ability are thought to be better suited for men. Interviewed mid managers agree that there is a need to accelerate gender balance in male dominated fields. Next slide. The second finding is that most C-level respondents think women and men are equally ambitious and equally willing to work long hours if needed. But a significant portion of respondents, which totals a third, think that men are more ambitious. Next slide. For the third finding, at the C level, there are contradictory perceptions on the impact of caring responsibilities of women. Both men and women are ascertained to experience obstacles to promotion due to no prior professional network, low perception of capability, lack of formal education, and other factors. There was only one obstacle, which was not assessed to be gender neutral. And 74% of C-level respondents said women are more likely than men to experience balanced caring responsibilities as an obstacle for promotion. This is further compounded by 65% of C-level respondents who also said that women are more likely than men to feel pressure from others to prioritize family. And 74% again of the respondents also said that women are more likely than men to have stepped back from leadership roles to prioritize families. Next slide, please. But interestingly, 56% of C-level respondents said women and men are equally ambitious to progress to leadership roles. And 21% of the same executives believe women are more willing to work longer hours when needed, compared to only 6% who responded that men have a greater willingness to do so. These actually contradicts the C-level beliefs that are discussed in the previous slide. Next slide, please. This is something I'd like you, our audience, to think about in relation to your own experiences and in your own workplaces. Think about what are the implications to women if top management expects them to be ambitious and to put in long hours despite recognizing the social expectation to prioritize the family. Next slide, please. For our fourth finding, C-level respondents think mid-managers are less progressive about gender attributes and behaviors at home than mid-managers actually are. 31% of the respondents think that mid-managers believe mostly women should be responsible for care work, while only 8% of mid-managers say they believe the same. Most interviewees state that both men and women are now taking responsibility for duties at home, with both parents sharing parenting and childcare responsibilities. Next slide, please. Further, 23% of C-level respondents think that mid-managers believe mostly men should be primarily responsible for earning for the family. However, only 10% of mid-managers say they believe the same. These two insights show a big disparity in perception, indicating that perhaps C-level executives are letting their own perceptions and beliefs color their understanding of mid-managers. Next slide. The same results occurred when we asked mid-managers about their beliefs on how their peers and colleagues think about these topics. Mid-managers think their peers are less progressive about gender attitudes and behaviors at home than their peers actually are. Almost half of the mid-managers think that their peers believe only women should be responsible for care work, but none of their peers believe the same. In fact, 92% of mid-managers say that men and women should be equally responsible for care work. Next slide. Moreover, 1/3 of mid-managers think their peers believe mostly men should be responsible for earning for the family. However, only 10% of their peers believe the same. Again, this wide disparity between how mid-managers think their peers think and the reality may indicate that people have certain biases and preconceived notions about their colleagues. Next slide. And here's another food for thought that you can ponder on even after this webinar ends. How does it impact workplace behavior when people think that the people around them are less progressive than they are? What would the implications be? Next slide. Fortunately, companies here in the Philippines are recognizing that gender norms create an impact on how people interact with each other in the workplace. A number of efforts and initiatives strive to positively shift gender norms. Building a culture that values all roles in the organization means that espousing no roles are too small. This encourages both men and women to explore new fields and roles. Amplifying stories of charting career paths in fields traditionally dominated by different gender can encourage people to seek growth opportunities and take on new challenges. Promoting awareness about company diversity, equity, and inclusion practices by formalizing DE&I practices and building awareness, not just with employees, but with potential hires in the general public as well. Ensuring diversity amongst candidates for promotion means that decision makers should have a wide pool of candidates with diverse backgrounds and viewpoints. This does not mean compromising on the qualifications just to meet the quota, but rather providing equal opportunities to those who might be overlooked for advancement. Being purposeful in job design considers individual vision for the future and allows movement within the organization and showing support for individual growth and development. Next slide, please. Featuring and providing access to role models who have hurdled barriers on their way to success can encourage both men and women to aim for higher roles within the organization. Programs that seek to influence views on care work may also encourage behavior change. The younger generation, in particular, is already more open to shared parenting. This can address difficulties in balancing work and home responsibilities and competing priorities. Families come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Parental leaves and other benefits that are gender neutral encourages men and women to share in the care responsibilities of children and family members. Finally, a sense of belongingness is at the heart of diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. Measuring belongingness through a DE&I index or a broader people index will allow organizations to do a temperature check on the culture and governance of the organization. Next slide. And that's it for the highlights of the research report on gender norms in the workplace. Please stay tuned for the final report, which you will be able to download or view on the MBC website, either by the end of this month or early next month. Thank you and good afternoon again.
Thank you so
I
much,
turn it
Angie.
over back to Eileen. Thank you, Reyes.
Thank you. We have time to accommodate 1 to 2 questions from our audience. So if you'd like to ask a question, please do raise your hand or type your question in the chat box. Okay. Okay, let's see. If we do not have any questions, you can also reach Angie. Well, you can email us if you have any questions on the study that we just ran, and we'll get to them after this event. So thank you again, Angie, for sharing with us the highlights from the MBC Investing in Women study on gender norms in Philippine corporations. So now allow me to introduce our speakers. As CEO of Microsoft Philippines, Peter Maquera is responsible for accelerating the cloud and digital transformation journey of every business in the country, helping the community build resilience through digital skills and empowering digital-first companies and startups with the tools to scale their innovation. Peter has extensive experience in building and transforming companies from early stage development to market leadership across various industries, including business process outsourcing, IT, real estate, and finance. Good afternoon, Peter. And our second speaker, Leigh Reyes, is Chair Emeritus at MullenLowe TREYNA. She is the founder of Talent is Everywhere, a startup that aims to bring stories from Southeast Asia to global conferences and events. She is also Senior Advisor at Educacion.ph, President of the Board of Fountain Pen Network Philippines, and was President of the Internet and Mobile Marketing Association of the Philippines, or IMAP board in 2021. Under her leadership, IMAP launched the Purple Boomerang, an award recognizing empowering portrayals of women in digital marketing and advertising in partnership with Investing in Women. Welcome, Leigh, and thank you for joining us. Without further ado, let me hand over the floor to our first speaker, Peter.
Hi, thank you, Reyna. Can everyone, there we go, there I am. Good afternoon, Makati Business Club. So I'll be speaking today about, next slide, please, after this one, about diversity and inclusion. And at Microsoft discovers gender, of course, specific to women. And the other two major segments for us would be persons with disability and the LGBTQIA+ segment. So I think it's broader in scope, but of course, this is definitely appropriate for gender or women equality and inclusion as well. So at Microsoft, we often get questions about how we approach diversity and inclusion. What does diversity and inclusion mean to our company? What are our commitments? What progress have we made? How do we know if we're taking the right approach? At Microsoft, our approach to diversity and inclusion is uniquely tied to our company's growth mindset culture and rooted in our mission. Next slide, please. Microsoft has grown to a $2 trillion company with over 190,000 employees and with activities in 190 countries. What does it mean to engage, empower, and support the success of people in all these places in the world, both inside and outside of our company? We can only do that successfully when we focus on including everyone. And that's where diversity and inclusion comes in. There's billions of people on this planet who want to achieve more, but too often having a different set of circumstances, abilities, or background can block someone from fully participating in the world on their own terms. So as we continue to work in more global and complex environments, focusing on diversity and inclusion will make us more adept at meeting the challenges and opportunities of the modern society. Next slide, please. So our journey and our learnings are ongoing, but we're clear about our goals. With our company values in mind, we want every employee to feel like they can be their authentic selves so we can do our best work. We're focused on increasing representation from interns all the way to the boardroom. We aim to influence systemic and sustainable change, which requires us to do more than just put up posters or write a check. It requires us to do micro and macro motions every single day that influence employees' experiences and transform the systems that drive access, opportunity, and greater equality. Diversity and inclusion is complex, often challenging, and sometimes messy, but it is essential to our strategy and our success as a company. Next slide, please. Diversity and inclusion is an expression of these three things: our mission, our culture, and values. But we cannot empower the world beyond Microsoft if we don't represent the world inside Microsoft. We can't ask employees to leave their identities at the door when they come to work. The impacts of the outside world show up in our organizations every day, and employees have made it clear that they need companies to understand their lived experiences and support them holistically inside and beyond the company's boundary. Companies can do this through benefits, policies, advocacy, access to opportunity, behavior change, and making space for challenging but necessary conversations that bring issues like social justice, covering, and mental health to the forefront. Next slide, please. At Microsoft, we believe that our mission to empower everyone will only be fulfilled if everyone is included. While so many more are now aware of how critical this is in our workplace and our industries, it's still useful to ground ourselves in the case for diversity and inclusion. We think about this in three ways: the business case, the socio-political case, and the human case. Next slide, please. For the business case, to reach consumers in every part of the marketplace, companies must reflect those customers in their products and represent them in their workplace. Look how significant this is. The global spending power of women is $32 trillion. The global spending power of LGBTQIA+ consumers is $3.9 trillion. 1 billion of the 8 billion people in the world have some form of disability. So imagine being able to include these segments as part of your part of your market opportunity. But in addition to reaching a broad range of consumers, diverse and inclusive companies are more innovative and profitable, in part because they're better at attracting and retaining top talent. And increasingly, there's much at stake as companies navigate rapidly changing forces in the talent marketplace. Next slide, please. In terms of the human case, well, there are driving business and socio-political reasons for companies to prioritize diversity and inclusion. At Microsoft, we believe the most compelling case and the most important one is the human case. In the workplace, we strive to create conditions for ourselves and others to perform at our best. And the science shows us that exclusion actually makes that impossible. The neuroscience of inclusion tells us that when the brain feels excluded, it activates in the very same way as physical pain. So think about that for a second. When you're physically injured, your brain processes that pain in the same way it processes the feeling of being excluded. So being excluded actually hurts. Bringing that into the workplace and reflecting on the realities of microaggressions and bias, you can only imagine the impact. So it should come as no surprise to any of us that when we feel pain, in this case due to exclusion, our brains don't function as effectively. When we feel excluded, we're less productive. We don't think as intelligently. We procrastinate. We become more frustrated. We're less likely to cooperate with others. So you see how important it is to create an environment that fosters something totally opposite to this. Next slide, please. With our company's platform and mission and our understanding of the multifaceted case for diversity and inclusion, we've continued to evolve how we approach this work at Microsoft. Next slide, please. So for decades, diversity and inclusion within organizations was mainly focused on compliance, satisfying regulatory and policy requirements. For Microsoft, we believe our way forward is to evolve from compliance to conviction. When diversity and inclusion is grounded in conviction, it means that we don't only do what is required of us, but beyond that, we understand why we prioritize diversity and inclusion, connecting to a deeper personal, social, or business motivation. Doing so allows us to intentionally develop the behaviors that enable the change we aspire to make. Next slide, please. So there's some core principles we keep in mind when we meet our accountability to do this work. We do things that will drive meaningful, sustainable change, understanding that activity must lead to intentional outcomes. Next slide, please. At Microsoft, we take a holistic approach to diversity and inclusion, it starts with the top senior leadership team that's collectively invested and individually accountable for diversity and inclusion. This is because we know that to be successful in driving behavior change, addressing systemic inequity, and strengthening inclusion, we need leaders to raise the bar and show up for this work every day. But it doesn't stop there. All leaders at all levels are formally accountable for the long-range strategy and day-to-day execution. And it's a core priority for all of our employees who are encouraged to practice, learn from failure, grow on the topic of diversity through everyday interactions and self-reflection. It's actually in a lot of our scorecards and embedded in our technologies when we do performance reviews. Next slide, please. Another one is our approach to core benefits, informed and aligned with our evolving understanding of employees' identities and needs. For example, caregiver support. Our caregiving benefits include parental leave regardless of gender, comprehensive health and wellness benefits, enhanced fertility benefits, and subsidized backup care. Additionally, Microsoft recognizes that families come in all forms. The most important goal is to give employees the opportunity to be fully present for all the moments that matter at home and at work. Next slide, please. Another area of innovation is anchored in the way we connect our cultural cornerstone of growth and mindset to diversity and inclusion through the foundational concept of allyship. At Microsoft, we define an ally as a person who makes an intentional decision to understand, empathize, and act in support of others. It is not a person's identity. Rather, it's a lifelong commitment and a set of interpersonal practices that, when adopted at the organizational level, are key to creating and sustaining an inclusive culture. Next slide, please. We also innovate by constantly evolving our understanding of identity and infusing that understanding into our programs, our systems, and our culture. Recently, we developed an LGBTQIA informational series, 7 short videos that educate others about foundational concepts related to gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. It's available to any Microsoft employee who's interested in deepening their understanding. Next slide, please. So at Microsoft, we believe in transparency and accountability because our work to attract, retain, and grow a more diverse talent pool will only be successful if we're committed to and accountable for change. That's why we hold all leaders accountable for making progress, and their progress is reflected in their annual performance evaluation and rewards. We then regularly share our progress with employees and the public. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up, the work is not easy. It's not a project with a start and end date. It's something we're deeply committed to as a company and accountable for us as an industry leader with a global platform. We believe that diversity and inclusion can be the engine for even greater social and technological progress in a rapidly changing world. Our employees, our partners, our customers, and our society expect us to keep our focus and keep making progress. Thank you very much. I look forward to joining the panel later.
Thank you, Peter, for the insightful presentation. Looking forward to hearing more from you later during the open discussion. Next up, we have Leigh Reyes. Over to you, Leigh.
Hi everyone. So I'm Leigh. I'm from MullenLowe TREYNA, and I'd like to start with a very short story just to ground what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So 18 years ago, I was a single mother who had to go on maternity leave, and I got maternity benefits, but the maternity benefits were 1/10 of my salary as a breadwinner. And so not only did I had to accept a 90% cut in salary, I also had to take care of my son and try to keep my head together. And this is already in an environment where I thought, as a female executive creative director of a very large advertising agency, that we already had something along the lines of progressive gender roles. And um, it was a huge surprise, like a shock of water over my head when I realized maybe we had a lot more work to do. And that's why the title of my talk is Good is the Enemy of Great, because so many of us actually think we're doing good already and we're putting in the measures that we have in place. And yet we could be better. We could be doing more, and we could be actively helping women rather than just managing the situations we have. Next slide, please. So this data comes from a book that I keep close to my heart. It's called Invisible Women by Criado Perez. And it's about how women are almost excluded from the way data is gathered and presented. So did you know that as a woman, you are 47% more likely to sustain serious injury in a car accident because crash test dummies are modeled after male bodies? Next slide. As a woman, you are also at significantly higher risk of developing depression and anxiety when working greater than 55 hours a week, because every woman is a working woman, but much of it is actually unpaid labor and invisible. Next slide, please. And as a woman, you are likely taking drugs deemed safe based on what's called non-sex disaggregated data, because women are usually underrepresented in trials. And what does this mean in the context of what we're talking about today? Next slide. Because even in organizations, it's really what goes unnoticed that is a sure sign of gender programs, policies, conversation needing to improve. And this is where you see it. You see it in culture, you see it in behavior, you see it in many things that are deemed soft or not necessarily covered by policy. So when I talk about these things, I think about, for example, what is mandatory for us is that every office has a nursing room. But what's not mandatory is there us talking about, is there something that's potentially stigmatizing in having to hide when you're breastfeeding, even in a working environment? Or most companies would already have in place anti-sexual harassment policies, but do we discuss actively and look at, is there an existing gender pay gap across levels in our organization? Is there anything better we can do around the language we use when we talk about gender? Are we sensitive to how gendered our language is? If I may shift into Filipino for a moment, ambition or ambitious is non-gendered in English. But when you say ambisyosa in Filipino, it carries a negative weight. And so when we use words like antare naman niya, right? When in fact somebody is being just trying to be a leader. And then we understand why language is also important in terms of culture, behavior, and what goes unremarked in a workplace. Next slide, please. So in MullenLowe, I think it's a mixture of luck and intentionality. And maybe for many of us, that's what it is. I led the agency for 10, 11 years. I promoted a woman executive creative director who eventually became chief creative officer. In our particular industry, if you look at the rest of the world, there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of women being represented above the creative ranks in advertising and marketing. And what I mean when I say it's partly luck and partly intentional is it's lucky that I was there, and it's lucky that women are there and people who are allies and who notice these things. But then it becomes intentional because you cannot unsee what you know and you have to do something about it. So 4 things that you can probably take away from this talk. The first one is notice. Actively notice how people are behaving. When you're having a meeting, who stands up and says, does anyone want coffee? that's naturally gendered in our society, and yet do we look at it? Do we wonder why? Do we look to our right and say, Gerald, would you mind getting the coffee today? And so these things are active but soft interventions in a culture that you can nudge towards becoming more neutral or even more helpful towards gender recognition. The second one is to model the behavior you want to scale, not just to see, but to scale. Because it's even if you're the only person who's calling this out in a meeting, if you're not in the meeting, is anyone else going to be doing it? So this right behavior needs to scale. It doesn't just stop at you. My third would be something that was mentioned by Angie earlier, just this burden on women, right? The caring burden as well as working. So the third, which is very obvious to women like me, but might not be obvious to other men or other women, is do not uphold superwomanhood as a virtue. And this probably is going to take, at least from my standpoint, the most work. And then the fourth one is do your part. Look at meetings like this as a venue to define for others what you think progress should look like, because there is diversity even in how we perceive we should go about this. Next slide, please. I'll just go into detail into these. So the first one is, as I said earlier, every office is a nursing room, but does every office analyze if a gender pay gap exists in their companies? Second slide. Next slide, please. Notice this as well. As I said, most offices have anti-sexual harassment policies, but do you train people to be sensitive to language and to behavior? And I think that's also important, because so much of when we say microaggressions, when we say these are small behaviors, it's so easy for us to let it slide and to just let it go. I'm too busy, I'm too tired. I don't want to confront this today. There's things that need to be done. This report has to be submitted. Next slide, please. So model the behavior that you want to scale. Challenge gender assumptions when you see them and not after. And I think this is really difficult. You know how in meetings, I think you might have noticed this as well, that first of all, younger people in meetings, so people who are more junior in terms of rank, tend to not speak as well and as quickly. And then if you don't make room for them, especially younger women, then they don't speak at all. So you have to call that out when you're there. And two, you also explain to people that that's what you're doing. Don't leave it open to interpretation. Next slide, please. Superwomanhood, otherwise called the glorification of unpaid labor. Next slide. We are so fond of this, of making virtuous something that is actually a multiple burden. If women are overstretched at home, that means many feel they cannot mentally or physically or mentally put in the extra hours demanded by many workplaces. Women make up the majority of part-time workers, for instance, and in turn are less likely to get pay rises or promotions after having children. This is a great article about the mental load that was tackled in the UK just in 2021. Next slide. And the last one is do your part. So whatever your internal culture is really shows in the work. One of my favorite sentences that I quote all the time is encode our rights in the protocols you write. And what does that mean? It means that what we think, the way we think, our assumptions about the world come out in how we do our work. And if we are much more powerfully gender aware and progressive internally, then it will inevitably show in what we do and what we show to the world. As people in advertising, our work and our thoughts actually scale because they have media money and media weights behind them, and repetition becomes truth. So that's our role, I think, and it's our role to actually uplift and work with clients who believe in the same thing. Next slide. And to show you an example of that, this is the work that we did for Avon called Let Her Be, which won awards and recognition in 2021 for really telling people that, hey, it's not just up to women, it's up to society to actively change. And I'd like to show you the case video that we did for that.
It's 2021, but brands are still making a spectacle out of women having cool jobs, doing sports, or being bosses. By treating women's success like a novelty, it only reinforces the false notion that these aren't normal. And the pat on the back can be pretty patronizing. So for International Women's Day, Avon shifted the focus with a campaign called Let Her Be. Instead of discussing whether or not girls can do things, we focused on what's really standing in her way, a society that holds her back. A video shone the light on microaggressions, seemingly harmless comments that actually harm women, but are so ingrained in culture that we hardly notice them. The video clapped back at outdated notions on things like beauty standards, manners, and whether or not to have children. And it stirred the pot. The press talked about the subject to the tune of 4.7 million pesos in media values. Influencers started talking about how society treats women differently, and the discussion spread online. In the end, Let Her Be logged over 6.2 million in reach, garnering over 20 million impressions online. Proving that empowerment is not a question of whether or not women can do things, but rather a check on the culture that holds her down. Hashtag Let Her Be.
And that's it. To summarize, can we just acknowledge that diversity amongst women and evolve continually what you measure for success? Last slide. I think I have one more slide. Yes, be your own revolution. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leigh. And Peter also earlier. Let me call on Eileen again to join us for the panel discussion and open forum. She will be moderating this portion of the program. Eileen, I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for those very nice insights from not just yourself, but how Microsoft is really putting into practice, diversity and inclusion, and in fact, using science as part of that, right? And thank you also, Leigh. That was a wonderful video as well. Very pragmatic approach to this. And thank you for sharing your personal story to all of us, because that's when it lands and it hits home, right? So we're now off to this exciting portion of the session this afternoon, the open forum. So for the next few minutes, allow me to moderate, and maybe I will, in this case, start off with Peter. Right. So, so Peter, you're amongst many of us. Of course, we need to be gender neutral here, right? So with your sharing, Peter, maybe we can start off with you. Improving workplace gender equality. It is a key goal of the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainability Development. Maybe not all know, but Microsoft is being recognized as a very gender inclusive workplace champion by the United Nations. So what, in your view, is the initiative that has made the most impact? Either in your view, just personal view, Peter, or maybe for Microsoft in general, what among the many things that you've done in this area, what do you think had the most impact?
Eileen, thank you. And it's always surprising to me because I think I'm surrounded by so many power women, so I never felt that you were disadvantaged. But I do think, certainly the data shows that we have some work to do. At Microsoft, actually, it's only recent that maybe a few years ago that our percent of women in the workplace was less than a third. And our attrition with women was in the 40 to 45% range. So certainly that would suggest that there was a problem in the workplace. I think maybe the greatest influencers in changing that, because right now we're at about 50-50. I think we're actually highest among the Microsoft countries in Asia Pacific. I think it starts from the very top. Of course, our CEO, and at the CEO level and in Redmond, I think the biggest thing was changing our employee value proposition, the benefits in terms of parity, the career paths, again, parity, the skilling opportunities, and the opportunities to have meaningful work. I think that starts at the top. The other one, I think, is also how we down into our operating motions, how we review people. Before we actually would do what's called connects a couple of times a year. We're reminded about biases, certainly that remind us that gender is a bias. It's a bias that if somebody is quieter, doesn't mean they have less impact. It's a bias that if you don't see someone more as often, let's say they're dropping their kid off to school or something, that's also a bias, and focus on the impact. So I think that's a tone from the top, and then we localize, in terms of how we recruit. It's very easy to make excuses and say, hey, there's not as many women in the scientific, technical, and engineering fields, and let's just be quick about it and hire that guy. So if you're not intentional about it, maybe you can't do it right away because things are just the way they are, but you have to have a plan and be intentional that at some point, one, starting today, let's make sure that there are women candidates that we are selecting from. But on top of that, over a certain period, be it 2 years, 3 years, or whatever it is, that we would achieve our parity, and so that's the things from the very top down to local leadership level. It is very intentional, but it actually happens also. It's your pocketbook, and we're kind of a bunch of robots because we're always reminded by the technology about it's not just what the person did, but how they did it. We have this construct called the 3 circles of impact. So it's not just the impact of what you did, but you also have to demonstrate, how you worked as a team and how you included others for that diverse thinking. So Eileen, I think it's a lot of things, but I would say those are probably the top 3 that, that kind of resonate with me.
Yeah. So Peter, if I may, again, it's tone up the top, right? And for you and Microsoft, you have the HQ globally, right? And you have local, tone at the top, but localize it, you're saying, right? And making sure that a lot of even the micro details are intentional. Thank you, Peter, for that.
Yeah,
so,
sorry, go ahead.
Yes, Leigh, maybe I ask you also, I also personally get this all the time, right? Many of the local companies, many of the members, we do a lot of focus group discussions in MBC, whether they're large groups, smaller groups. One of the common comments or asks that I get from the women in the C-suite is that, we have, okay, that's good. You have many examples, and Eileen, yes, also IBM, you do this, right? But what if the senior management or the board members, they're not with us? So no matter how much we want to support DI in our organization, we can't seem to get management on with us. So what is your advice there, Leigh? How do you get the senior management in the entire organization to be with us on this journey? You come from, you have experience with the startup. MullenLowe is also big, company, international company. So maybe you can give us your perspective here.
I'm sorry, I'm smiling because I'm thinking about what would my answer as a power woman be. I actually think that we should hire better and work with better people. And it starts from how we look at who we work with and what we value. If your senior management doesn't align with your core values, then we should be taking another look at senior management. Right? I mean, I think for me, it's that simple. And it might take years. This is the work of years. This is not the work of quarterly reports. And, so much of our initiatives here tend to be okay because you've made it through to the year-end report, right? And you finally filed it and it looks good. and then you move on to your next job, and maybe it didn't scale because you only stay there for a year. So I've had to lead creative departments of various agencies since I was in my 20s. And I can tell you that if you are quite clear about what you want out of the people you work with, the culture will take care of it. But you have to be clear and you have to call it out. So if one way, I think, to get your seat, so aside from hiring better and just choose better people in the first place, but I think also this kind of like, you have to believe that this is the right thing to do and that it is best for people and it is best for business. And if you don't believe that, then it will be half-hearted. If you're just, I don't know if you said, I mean, my friends and I have been talking about this op-ed today about SVB, right? I don't know if you read that, but they were saying that maybe they were taking like too much time, like talking about looking at their diversity numbers instead of looking at the actual business. And it's kind of like opinions like that get in the way, I think, of us doing what's right for humans. So if your senior management isn't on board, review, and the second, review who they are. And the second part is just make sure to do the work all and be consistent through years. You're not going to solve it in a year. You're probably not even going to solve it in 2 years.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, so you're talking about clarity of purpose, right? We gotta communicate and absolutely be clear, right, on our purpose, doing the right thing. And I guess maybe you're saying also persisting. You know, it may not be right the first time, it could be difficult, but keep doing it anyway. So if we must believe that it is the right thing to do. Fair?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
So thank you, Leigh. Back to you, Peter. You know, we also research on Microsoft. Thank you, MBC. That we also know that you have a volunteer-based diversity, inclusion, and allyship council. When you started this, Peter, so we're still on the point of getting the entire organization to be with you, right? So with, you know, if it's volunteer-based, no, this idea, how can you share us the story? How did this start for Microsoft? Was this an idea from HR? Does it have to come from HR, or we ask anyone? What are your what can we learn from your experience?
Honestly, I'm not totally sure, and I think Philippines is, again, it's off the charts. Our office is just in the top of the leaderboard.
Because you're very supportive. Thank you, Peter.
There's, again, like I said, there's the mechanisms in place. You can't really avoid it because it's part, when you do evaluations, you have to prove how you leverage D&I. I mean, there's no getting around it. It affects your compensation, right? And so it's and even it's actually also part of our mission. As an example, when I was being recruited, I watched a video on a global video, different nationalities of deaf people. And what was interesting about it was captioning and it was translating and conducting the meeting in the different languages. And so that was an example of how powerful it was. If you can, the North Star of how you do your product development around technologies for inclusion, look how powerful it is. And of course, that obviously applies to women. And if the technology works for those that have some sort of disability and are not included, it's that if you develop something that works for them, it's even that much better for those who aren't excluded. So I think part of it, and one I was just thinking about what Leigh was saying, I think the other part of how you get it going is nothing succeeds like success. And Microsoft has been so successful with this strategy and with the North Star. But in terms of local, I wonder if it's a Filipino thing, right? We're just big on volunteerism, especially when it comes to things like D&I or things like sustainability. But the way it works at Microsoft is because we're a global company, there's actually global resources. There's a huge group, women at Microsoft. So you'll compare notes and we'll follow each other and we'll see what the other countries are doing. And then we'll adopt these practices. But when I was saying, I wonder if it's innately Filipino, we were doing a pride parade. And I was shocked that, it's practically the whole office. And it's how many people are here? And I said, it's like practically everyone was there. And I said, are there that many people who are, excluded? And they said, no, sir. It's 70% of them is the allies. And so I think that spirit, and maybe it's innately a Filipino trait, but it's certainly part of the very heart and soul of Microsoft, is we just have this really incredible culture to help each other out and to be inclusive. So I'm not totally sure, but the frameworks are there, but it's a really special culture actually.
That gives us a lot of hope, because that means for all of us attending here, you're going to get help. So, our two speakers may be ahead of the game, but, you're going to get help. You will get volunteers, and, everyone's willing to help each other here. And like you said, Peter, locally we do that, right? And Leigh, both of you actually in your respective talks, you mentioned quite a bit about culture. Right. And I'll get to if Bernadine would, she has a comment in the chat. I'll get to you in a while if you can share. But, you both covered culture, and I can't buy culture. None of us can. Right. But mass media is a big role to play, or I guess in the communications as well. Again, having the clarity, Leigh, how do you think we can get help? This is your experience already. This is your direct experience, right? Again, what's your advice to us? How can we really leverage? So Peter spoke about technology, the science behind it, but in media, how can we help in progressing this journey for advancement of women and diversity in general?
I think, when we did Avon Let Her Be, and even for work that we do, internally we ask ourselves, are we pushing stereotypes? Are we pushing tropes? Is what we believe as individuals being reflected in the work that we do for brands? And I think that's important. I think that at the end of the day, you do need to put your money where your beliefs are. And because, purpose without capital is just a dream. So I think the real way to go about this is to be consistent. That's the simplest way I can think about it. If you are consistent in what you believe, if you are clear about what you believe, it comes out in what you do, and it comes out in what you refuse to do. So internally, for example, we have clearings. You know how sometimes you see videos for brands and people start asking each other, how did that get approved? How did that get how many people looked at that and signed off on that, before it actually made it into production? Because there are 1,000,001 steps before anything makes it into production and actually goes out there. So somewhere along the way, nobody spoke up. Somewhere along the way, someone said, yes, that's okay. It's okay to show this superwoman trope again, right? Let's show a woman getting all of her life satisfaction from being the perfect person. And over time, the more you see that, the more damaging it becomes, because you can never live up to a manufactured benchmark of perfection, when in fact it's society that needs to adjust how it expects things from you. And so that's what we try to do. And that's why we actively look at what we do and not just say, oh, this is what's going to sell, or this is what the clients are going to buy. That's part of our responsibility, right? That what we believe comes out in the work we do on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Leigh. You've been very consistent. That we gotta be very consistent in the messaging. We have to believe, we have to hire, the right people, be surrounded by people who really believe the same purpose and agenda. So thank you for that, Leigh. I don't know if she's willing to speak up here, but do you mind, Bernadie Hamora seems to represent some Dana here. Bernadie, would you like to elaborate? She put something up in the chat. I'd like to read it, but if Bernadie is okay, if I may ask you to just make a comment for the rest of the group here about Samdana. I'll just quickly read what you wrote up. In Samdana, we are also extending women empowerment in indigenous peoples as part of Women Environmental Defender, empowering, developing livelihood, and understanding their role in the community. Somehow culture and tradition does compromise, but understanding their culture is a must for us to connect and how this inclusiveness work in IP, indigenous peoples, and by that, we are also culture sensitive at the same time. So Bernadie, would you like to expand on this so we can all also learn from you before we ask our speakers for their final advice? Bernadie? If you are not shy to speak up.
Hi, Eileen. This is Roxanne. Bernadie's signal is unstable right now, so she's able to chat, but maybe
No
not.
worries.
Roxanne,
No
I'll
worries.
try to do my best also.
Oh,
Okay,
there
good.
you are.
There you
Okay,
are.
good.
Bernadie, go ahead.
Yes, once again, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you also for this opportunity to, oh my God, I am not prepared, so it's okay for me to just voice over. If that would be great. Um, I will just share about this. We are promoting this inclusiveness, and somehow it is a good advocacies, especially for women's and in the field also of indigenous people. We have these limitations of promoting empowerment and inclusiveness in the in indigenous peoples because somehow we can affect their culture if we will try to push this kind of empowerment and inclusiveness we have. But the good thing is that we can learn from them, and then we can connect this kind of empowerment we are trying to impart with them. And by that, learning their culture must be our first priority, especially as working in NGOs. And we must, I mean, we have to be mindful of what we are trying to impart with this, with the indigenous people, women, because we might have this cause a shake their culture if we will just try to impart something without knowing their culture. So the good thing is that indigenous people is willing to learn and willing also to listen this kind of empowerment because they are really in depth with their culture, and all this empowerment, all this inclusiveness is new to them. So we must try to be with them step by step so that they will understand this empowerment thing we are trying to impart with them. Maybe that's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Bernadie. I know, I put you on the spot, but, it's very interesting to hear your sharing as well, and the fact that we're truly being inclusive here. I did not realize we have, by the way, Bernadie is a community facilitator for Samdana, focuses on IP, indigenous people. So thank you for that. See, all three of you already are talking about culture in a very different sense. So we got that very strong message. So before we close off the panel, may I ask, maybe I start off with Leigh. May I ask you, Leigh, and then Peter, there are many things we have to do, right? We heard from the findings earlier, right? While there's very significant improvement, as Peter said, in the Philippines, looks like we're really improving quite a bit. But there is a lot of influence from our peers, the social norms of the community, basically, or the people we work with, as to how they view us and how women can really rise up to leadership positions, and in general, we all become more inclusive, right? But with all the many things that we have to do, if I gave you only one card, what is maybe that one big thing, or your top advice for all of us who are in this journey? You know, how can we approach this and, you know, get probably on the path to success, like, you know, you both have already gone through? What is your advice? Maybe Leigh, we start off with you.
Yeah, I can start off. Yeah. So they tell you that to build your next layer of leadership, you need to hire people who are better than you. I will purposefully gender that statement. Hire women who are better than you. Hire women who scare you. Hire women who make you uncomfortable. Hire women who think differently than you. Just hire women who are better than you. Then you can see the change.
Thank you, Leigh. That's very direct, very concise. And if it cannot be even clearer than that, let's see, Peter, don't forget that when you now have your talent acquisition team, are you better than me? No, I'm joking. So Peter, over to you. Thank you, Leigh, for that advice. Peter.
Eileen, can I cheat and answer it slightly differently? Because I think we spent a lot of time talking about what we do within the company. But to enable Leigh's advice, I think I do think women are underrepresented, certainly in tech, in terms of you know, from a pool to recruit from. So I think we also have to spend a lot of time, you know, because we're all in this together, and I think a lot of the organizations also need to kind of direct their energies outside. You know, like we spend a lot of time showcasing different leaders with our partners, with our, you know, and in our whole ecosystem, to show what good looks like, if you will. Here are leaders in the tech community, and they're women, and talk about their journey so that it inspires our young people to also be in STEM, that they can do it. And then on top of that, we do a lot of skilling programs. We do a lot of joint programs for, like Coca-Cola most recently, Code Without Barriers, to showcase women in data and AI and these higher value things. So it's not just internal, but there's a lot of things we can do externally to deepen the pool of resources of women that are very capable, enthusiastic, and that are better than me in emerging tech like data and AI and cybersecurity and cloud and all those types of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Leigh, for that comment as well. You know, we truly have to strongly model this. Maybe I shall invite the IP group of Bernadine next time. So you're all welcome. But, you know, once again, I don't think we have so much more time, but thank you so much, Peter and Leigh, for your time and your sharing, for your very
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Eileen.
Yeah, all of this, you know, has been really insightful for all of us here for this session. Thank you for sharing a bit of yourself in all this. But before we go, I would like to call on one of our other partners, from the Executive Director for Philippine Business for Coalition for Women, Julia Abad. If Julia, you're on, can we ask you to share with us, you know, your closing remarks as we close off the session for today? Once again, Peter and Leigh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Julia, over to you.
Thank you, Eileen. Thanks, Peter, and thanks, Leigh. The business sector, as we've seen, plays a critical role in the pursuit of gender equality and has shown a proven track record in promoting sustainable development. Companies with progressive policies and strategies, as we heard today, consistently generate greater economic value and growth. While global rankings show the progress we have made towards becoming a gender-equal country, we know that opportunities for women to participate in the labor market remain unequal. A previous study by MBC and PBCW in 2019 touched on the impact of culture and societal expectations on the workplace. Women tend to step back during their childbearing life phase, whereas men are expected to step up to increase financial support for their families. Women are also met with various challenges in the workplace, owing to the fact that many traditional workplaces are created by men for men. The findings of the report launched today are so relevant. Through the RAIN project, which we heard from Angie earlier, we hope to build on this earlier research to begin to determine how gender norms influence employee perceptions and later on company practices and policies. Correctly identifying the barriers to creating diverse and inclusive workplaces, as well as the factors that contribute to these barriers, is key to formulating responsive policies that will effectively address them. In PBC, we work with large and influential companies using evidence-based strategies, such as the Gender Equality Assessment Results and Strategies, or GEARS tool, which is designed for companies to gain a deeper understanding of gaps, opportunities, and strengths of the current workplace gender equality, or WGE strategies. PBC also provides high impact and customized action recommendations to track change and identify areas where targets can drive greater progress. We also document the milestones and accomplishments of our member companies as they implement their respective WGE initiatives. These are shared during membership events where they are given the opportunity to learn and share best practices among peers. CCC Philippines, or Champions of Change Philippines, on the other hand, engages top business leaders, we spoke about modeling earlier, in their personal capacity to lead gender equality and identify practical and constructive actions to shift systems of inequality. CEOs are committed to strengthen the advocacy through 4 action groups: flexible work, gender-balanced recruitment, gender-inclusive public image, and addressing harassment in the workplace. Overall, we do recognize that organizational change efforts to achieve workplace gender equality varies between companies. Each firm, as we heard, experience is unique and should select the most appropriate combination or sequences of action based on a thorough analysis of their circumstances. Despite all these, there is still a lot of work that needs to be done. Concerted efforts and meaningful collaborations are key to equality and eventually equity. Thank you to Makati Business Club's Women in the C-Suite Committee for putting together this thought-provoking discussion. In this advocacy space, the importance of supporting and amplifying each other's work cannot be underscored enough. PBC and CCC Philippines are so pleased to work with and support like-minded organizations like Investing in Women and MBC, and leaders like Eileen, Peter, and Leigh in dismantling the obstacles to creating truly diverse and inclusive workplaces. Happy Women's Month, and we look forward to a strengthened and continued partnership with all of you.
Thank you so much, Julia, for the inspiring message. And of course, for joining us in today's event. Before we go, we'd love to know how you found the event. Please scan the QR codes on your screens, or you may also click the link in the chat box. Please note that we may use your comments in our publications. If you're interested to learn more about our work at MBC, don't forget to like and follow us on Facebook. We also invite you all to share with us some key lessons and insights you learned from this event. Don't forget to tag us using our official social media handles. Before we go, may I invite everyone for a photo? Kindly turn on your cameras and we'll do a quick round before we officially end the program. Okay, see more cameras turning on. Let's wait, maybe 3 seconds. 1, 2, and okay. Biggest smiles, ready? 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, maybe you can do a second page just in case. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, great. Thank you again and good day. We look forward to having you in our future events. Thank you and happy Women's Month, everyone.
Happy Women's Month.
Happy Women's
Have
Month.
a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.